Welcome to podcast episode 16. And we said this evening we're going to talk about New England. We said we're going to talk about Thanksgiving because obviously that was last week. And then we're going to do a follow-up on your education series because I'm delighted to say, Julian, we had a number of questions from our listeners.
That's great.
So shall we start with New England? What do you want to say about New England?
New England is 6 US states. And obviously, if we do 6 US states per episode, we're pretty soon going to run out of places to discuss. So I think we should probably restrict ourselves to Vermont, New Hampshire and Maine, those sort of northern New England states, and talk a little bit about, you know, what a vacation is there and, you know, what there is to do there. Is that okay with you?
It is, but let me put it in context of my New England trip, because we're now going to rule out a few locations. So we started in Boston. We went to Portland, Maine by Salem. From memory, we then went to Jackson's Hole.
No, you didn't. You couldn't possibly go to Jackson's Hole because that's in Wyoming.
No, so maybe I'm getting
that
wrong
would be
then.
a very long detour. That would be about 1,500 miles detour.
What's the big skiing place? Is it called Jackson's? Very famous bridge.
I don't know which. There are lots of skiing places there. I mean, they're not particularly high mountains, but there are many skiing resorts there.
During the course of the podcast, I'll remember. We then went to Bretton Woods.
Did you happen to buy a romantic package?
No. And you're teasing me now. Went to Bretton Woods. We went to Burlington. So does Burlington count?
Yeah, that's in Vermont. Vermont.
Okay. Yep. And then we came back, ending up at sort of Cape Cod.
Okay. So let's keep Cape Cod for its own...
Okay.
Own one later on in the series, and we can talk about Cape Cod because that's a pretty good destination. Many Americans go there for their vacations every summer, and we can do a whole show on Cape Cod, or we can combine it with Martha's Vineyard and a few other things which are nearby.
That's South New England, yeah?
That's kind of South New England. What was your overall impression of New England from your trip?
Well, I'm going to start with somewhat of a negative point and somewhat controversial, Julian. We went in the fall, in October, and my wife on more than one occasion said, not as good as Surrey. I think she's being a little harsh, and obviously you've got to judge the timing right. But the colours weren't as exceptional as I thought they were going to be. And by the way, this time of year we're going was literally Halloween, so it was the end of October.
That's too late. Okay, so the first thing to say about New England is that many people go to New England for the fall, and they go there because of the beautiful colours. And there is this map that is produced which shows you where the fall is likely to be at its maximum beauty. And I think we're talking here northern New England. By the end of October, I think most of its beauty is already gone. So I think you'll be looking to go slightly earlier, but look up on the internet and find out when they're projecting the maximum beauty in each place in America. Obviously, you get fall all over America, but I suspect that you probably went a bit late and most of the colours had already been and gone.
Okay. So what do you want to say about it?
The first thing to say for our listeners is there are 3 seasons that you can go to New England. You chose kind of the most popular one, which is in fall. That's what it has world renown for. But I think I would argue that a summer vacation in New England is fantastic time to go. And I would also say it's a great winter vacation as well. And they are 3 completely different experiences because of the very different sort of weather conditions that you have. In the summer, it's not too hot, it's not too humid. It's the type of places where it has some very nice beaches. There are some great local baseball leagues. Many of the places have Shakespeare festivals. It's a very sort of literate place in the US to go. So it's a delightful time to go. My first trip ever to the US, back in the 1980s was to New England. It was the summer and I love the place. And then another time you can go is the winter, and you can go to parts of Maine and have really a very good snow experience. You can go dog sledding. You can go snowmobiling, you can go ice fishing on the lakes. You can even drive your car onto the lakes, which are so frozen through the extreme cold that they have for many months of the year. For me, there are 3 seasons that you can visit, and all of them make a good vacation. It just depends, what you're into.
Okay.
So what were your abiding memories of? So you're a bit disappointed with the leaves. What else did you notice from New England?
Mount Washington.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And the train up to the top.
Oh God. There wasn't another glorious station, was there?
No. It was, but certainly beats walking up. It's not an insignificant mountain, is it, Julian?
It's not. It's right at the end. So the Appalachian Trail, which runs from Georgia up into the far corner of New England, I think ends on Mount Washington.
Yeah, and the observation area at the top, you took in severe winds, you took in severe temperatures, at certain times. But definitely worth the train journey up to the top. So I like that.
New England is relatively small area of the US. There are 6 states within New England. So you've got Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, which are kind of the northern ones, and the southern are Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. Although Vermont and New Hampshire, are relatively small states, they are mostly forest. And I think there was a story a few years ago of a plane which went down with a number of people in it in a forest in New England, and it wasn't found for, I think, like 25 years. And they had been looking for it. They just hadn't been able to find it in the forest. So, when you're at the top of Mount Washington, I imagine that all you can see from the top is forest for tens of miles in any direction. Is that right?
That's not my total recollection. Yes, there are lots of forests, but there are other sort of peaks. And going back to what we said about the fall, that would be hopefully the good time to see the colours. But you can see it a long way. But again, as is always the case with high mountains, you need a clear day as well. We were fortunate when we went. It wasn't too cold, but you certainly wouldn't want to stay outside too long walking around the peak of Mount Washington. It was cold.
Good. What was the second thing you were going to say? Oh, sorry. I forgot to ask some polite questions about trains. What gauge was the train, Michael?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. It's narrow gauge, but it's a cog railway. Surprise, surprise. This is going by
not a cog railway.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think. And it's I think it was it electric or it might be
electric or diesel?
Diesel, I think it was a diesel going to the top. Yeah. But a good experience. Second one,
okay.
Julian.
Have I feigned enough interest in trains?
Yeah, you have. I can see. I'm wasting my time with you, Julian. The second one is obviously you being an economist by training and having worked for the Bank of England. Where do you think I might go in New England for what is undoubtedly one of the most significant meeting places post World War II?
Well, you mentioned it earlier on. Bretton Woods is what I think you're talking about.
Absolutely. And have you been to the room in the hotel?
I haven't. No, I haven't been to Bretton Woods. I mean, some important stuff was discussed there, but I didn't really need to see the room in which these discussions happened. So
it's a big hotel. Fantastic views. Actually, I would say the views from the hotel were by far the best we had of the fall, because it sort of sits sort of fairly high up, and you've got panoramic views. Not that I play golf. Looks like several golf courses. Very big hotel, and of course you can spend a little time checking out the actual conference room.
So you've been trying to embarrass me with questions that I don't know the answer to. What actual discussions were held at Bretton Woods then, Michael?
Well, as we know, it's a foundation, I suspect, of the modern economy. They decided how the Americans were going to refinance Europe and sort of decide what the monetary currency they were going to use and how they were going to do it. Isn't that so, Julian?
Well, sort of. And you're right. It is the foundation of modern 20th century economies. That was the place where the central bankers discussed and agreed that. And you stayed at Bretton Woods, or you just visited?
We went for afternoon tea.
Oh, okay.
And I suppose for our listeners, and this is not trying to catch you out, we are talking significant distances, aren't we, when we're talking about going around Vermont, Maine. So from memory, I mean, you're going to have to do like 250 miles a day?
Well, as you know from having read my book, High, Wide and Handsome, Americans don't measure distances in miles. They measure it in the time that it takes you to make that distance. And the thing about Vermont and New Hampshire is that there are a lot of non-freeway roads. So roads where you are doing maybe 35 miles an hour as the speed limit. So although the distances aren't necessarily huge, the time it takes you to go from one place to the other might actually be quite lengthy.
And I suppose I was thinking about our British listeners who might be thinking of planning a trip to New England. So what I'm saying is that expect to spend a significant amount of time in the car if you want to travel.
If you want to do everything, yes, that's right. But my advice would always be spend less time in the car and do just a smaller portion of what you want to see, and you'll enjoy it more. And I remember the first time we went there, we also went to Burlington. Which is, I think, a place you visited. And we just stopped there for the night. We, as usual, we hadn't really done much preparation. And we stopped there and we loved Burlington. This was a very small American town based around a lake. And we went to watch a minor league baseball match. We loved it so much. We went the 2 successive evenings. There's a lot of quaint things within New England. And these small towns, most of it in Vermont. I don't remember the population sizes, but most of these towns are maximum 10, 20,000 people in size. This is not a massive population centre, the northern New England.
Like you, we like Burlington. In fact, even now, I just struggle to remember the name of the lake, so I had to look it up. Is it
Lake Champlain?
Champlain, which is one of the lakes borders on Canada, but it's not one of the big 5 lakes, is it?
No, it's not. No. It's a fairly sizable lake, but it's not a Great Lake. The Great Lakes are really huge. That is merely massive. Yeah. So, I think Lake Champlain borders New York State as well.
But beautiful setting. Really liked it. So I'm going to give a name check to Hotel Vermont.
Oh, okay.
That's where we stayed at it, and it was very good. And like you, could have stayed longer.
Yeah, well, we stayed at the Motel 6. I think it was $19.99.
I fear we have different strategies when it comes to hotel selection, Julian.
Well, this was in the late 80s when we went there, so there has been some inflation, and also there has been some increase in earning power.
Okay. Now, I'm desperately trying to think of the place we said that I thought was called Jackson Hole, and you quite rightly said, no, it's not. No. But I'm hoping you're going to help me because I have a hotel story to go with that one.
Oh, yeah. Did you buy the romantic package?
No, I didn't. But romance was at the heart of the problem. We checked in, only to be told we'd been relocated to another hotel.
Oh.
And the reason why we'd been relocated, there was a wedding on.
Oh.
And they didn't think that we would want to stay in the hotel during the hotel wedding reception.
Okay.
At the time, we decided, not knowing and not seeing the hotel, no, we're not. We booked here, we will stay. And so we did stay, and we quite enjoyed the wedding reception. Obviously, the speeches didn't mean a lot to us.
Did you actually attend the speeches? Or
we were in the same room as the wedding reception.
Ah, excellent. And did you stay in touch with the happy couple?
No, not at all. But this is falling flat because I can't remember the name of the place or the hotel.
Ah, okay. Sounds very familiar with your hotel stories, Michael.
It was definitely above Motel 6.
Okay, yes. No, a Motel 6 is probably, apart from the non-branded, this is probably as pretty low as you can go, I think.
So what are your favourite things of New England?
Maple syrup. Did you eat any maple syrup while you were there?
No, but it's always available for pancakes, isn't it? So you couldn't have it.
It is, and they have particularly good maple syrup, as I understand it. The nature of the leaves on the maple tree in New England, the leaves are apparently very big, which makes a stronger syrup flavour. And they put this sort of tap into not a faucet. They put a tap into the maple tree, and then they undo the tap, and some maple syrup comes out, and they bottle that, and then they sell that. Yeah, I do quite like a bit of maple syrup. They have very good maple syrup. Did you see any moose and elk while you were there?
Don't recall seeing it, no.
They're pretty common. I mean, much of America, I think as we discussed before, there are a lot of deer and other ungulates. In New England, we saw some really fine moose and elk in the dusk of the day. And those are, really fine, supreme, large animals, which you can get relatively close to. And, we enjoyed that. What about white picket fences? Did you see? I know you must have seen lots of those. We
saw lots of those. And because we were there at Halloween, the level of attention to detail of decorating for Halloween was great. Lots of pumpkins.
Well, Halloween is terrific. We haven't done Halloween, have we, as a subject?
Don't think so.
Perhaps we'll do that at some point. We'll add that to our list. But the white picket fences, I mean, New England is known as a very pretty part of the US. It is, the houses are made of wood and they're generally painted white. They have these lovely little fences which are all fleshly painted every year. And they really are like something on that you might expect to see on a chocolate box. That northern part, not Maine necessarily, but Vermont and New England has a lot of that sort of very attractive chocolate box type of landscape. What about a covered bridge? Did you see any covered bridges, Michael?
I did. And you was mocking me, Julian. The name of the place is Jackson, and Jackson has the covered bridge.
Oh, okay. Yes. As you know, Jackson was a US president, so there are many places in the US which are called Jackson. So, okay, so that's the place that you liked. Covered bridges, there are a lot of covered bridges over New England, and I think we saw plenty of them. Do you know why there are covered bridges there, Michael?
No, I don't, Julian, but do you want me to guess?
Yes.
Could it be the excessive leaf fall and snow?
Snow. It's snow, yes. They have the covered bridges. They get a lot of snow up there, and they have a lot of covered bridges in order to keep the roads accessible so that people can go over the many bridges that they have in that part of the world. So a very attractive thing to go and see. Did you eat any Maine lobster or clam chowder while you were there?
I didn't, not being a great fan of lobster.
Ah, okay. That's their sort of main food stuff. So the Maine lobster, which is obviously from Maine, that is the kind of most celebrated lobster throughout the US. The prices of Maine lobster are through the roof, and people eat a lot of clam chowder as well. Did you see any summer camps while you were in New England, Michael?
No.
So summer camps, and perhaps this is another thing we should add to our list to discuss in the future. I think the home of summer camps is New England, and they have a very large number of camps where parents send their children to for a couple of months over the summer to educate and develop and grow their children. Many of them are based around lakes in the deep countryside of New England.
Returning to covered bridges, Julian, checking here, going back to Jackson, and the marital theme, the bridge is actually called Honeymoon Covered Bridge.
Does it say why?
No.
Did you see any major political families while you were in New England? Did you see any Kennedys or Bushes?
No.
Because both families hail from the northern part of New England. With both the Kennedys and the Bushes, they provided, I don't know how many governors and senators and presidents, but it's quite a large number when you add them all up.
Todd, I didn't appreciate it. I knew the Kennedys were New England. Isn't New England traditionally a very strong democratic state? Well, the Bushes being Republican, that's unusual.
I mean, more recently, it has trended Democrat, New England. But New Hampshire is always fairly tightly fought. Mm-hmm. And so that's always a little bit of a toss-up between Republican and Democrat. And it's really more famed for more independent thinking. So Bernie Sanders is famously the senator for Vermont. Mm. But up until fairly recently, he wasn't a Democrat. He was an independent socialist. More recently, they have a greater association with democratic politics, particularly Boston does. But many of the other areas, I think, move between the two parties, or being slightly more independent.
And isn't it, am I right in thinking it's one location in New England which famously sort of counts the vote for presidential elections and makes the quickest result? Because there's only about six people in the place,
Yeah, I think I can't remember the name of the place now, but they have to, because it's quite remote, I think they have to vote a couple of days beforehand. And so there have been many times when the votes from this particular town predict a complete landslide for one party or the other.
But they're notoriously unreliable because only about six people and they're all related.
I can't remember what the number is. It's no more than 10. It's a small number. So yes, I'd forgotten that fact. I think that there's a lot in New England. It was my first place in the US, and I love the experience. I'm sure if you're British or indeed any other nationality and you're looking for an area of the US to explore, you haven't been to New England, do consider it. I think the best time to go is probably summer, but the time when most people want to go is the fall. But it's early October rather than late October. And if you like the cold weather, then a really great time to go is in the winter. And when you get to Maine is a lot more, well, they're all very rural. Maine is very sparsely populated. And as you get away from the coastal areas and you go up into the sort of big logging concerns, the big forests up there, places like Moosehead Lake, those really are very rural indeed. And indeed, daughter number 1 was conceived in Maine.
Well.
Yeah. And hence she has the middle name of Maine.
No.
Yes.
Good job it wasn't at Disneyland then, really, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, daughter number 2, unfortunately, has the middle name of Kitchen Table.
Old jokes for the best ones, Julian. I like it. So, shall we give it a scoring system then? Shall we go to our football scoring system? Because I'm going to surprise you tonight, Julian.
Yes. Please do so.
New England is the West Ham, pushing to get into the Champions League. So, not in my top 3, but it could well be in top 4.
Okay, and what numerical number out of 5 would you give it?
And am I allowed decimal points, Julian?
Oh, if you must.
4.7.
Okay, 4.7. I actually would give New England 5 out of 5.
Yep.
I think it's an excellent place if you like sort of rural activities. And I'd be pretty confident that people would have a good time in New England. So I will give it a 5. So I think that's a pretty ringing endorsement from us.
Yeah.
Do you know why it's called New England, Michael?
Could it be the original settlers came from England?
Well, it was. There was a guy, won't really believe this guy's name. His name was John Smith. He named it New England in 1616. And then it was approved in 1620 by Royal Charter as New England. And I think there are a lot of things which are somewhat quintessentially English in the district.
Why do you think it is that the early settlers decided to call the places that they'd lived previously? Because, by the way, when you are driving there, it is quite, as somebody from England, it's quite disconcerting to see places like Portsmouth pop up or Plymouth pop up. The names for a lot of places are very familiar, aren't they?
They are, and actually, incidentally, while you're talking about Portsmouth, that is a beautiful little town on the coast, isn't it?
Yes, we drove there.
I guess that's what they knew. They were developing a new Portsmouth. They'd come from Portsmouth. Most of them were retreating from religious intolerance where they were, and they wanted more religious freedom. But somehow they wanted to take the name with them. I don't really understand it. I think if it were me, I would name it something completely new. But they obviously chose differently.
Julian, shall we talk about Thanksgivings? Because that was when? Remind me, was that last Thursday?
Yes, the 4th Thursday in November.
Okay. So what did you do for your Thanksgiving's dinner?
So it was our first Thanksgiving with an American family.
Okay.
Schools usually give a whole week off. And we always took the opportunity to come to Florida and get some cheap rentals and stay in Florida during that time. But this time was the first time we'd have Thanksgiving with an American family. Daughter number 1, she had Thanksgiving with her boyfriend's family. And daughter number 2, we had Thanksgiving with her friend's family back in Atlanta.
Oh, right. I thought you were in Florida now.
We were, and we took the short 850-mile road trip up to Atlanta for a few days, and then we drove all the way down again.
How long does that take you to do that, by the way?
Thanksgiving is always the 4th Thursday of November, and the Wednesday before Thanksgiving is always the busiest day on the roads. And I think it took us about 11 hours on the way up, and I think it took us about 10 hours on the way down.
My impression is that Americans do travel huge distances to get back to their families for Thanksgivings.
So, first of all, it's Thanksgiving without the S.
Isn't it?
Not plural, Thanksgiving.
Many families celebrating it. Doesn't that make it Thanksgivings? No?
Canadians have Thanksgiving on a different date in a different month.
As I discovered.
So, I guess if you were talking about the collective of Canadian plus US, that you would say there were Thanksgivings. But if it was just one US one, it's just called Thanksgiving.
Okay.
So the thing about Thanksgiving is to remember that it's part of a holiday season. So this holiday season starts with Halloween, which we mentioned early on in the pod, at the end of October. And then by the end of November, we then have Thanksgiving. And then towards the end of December, we have Christmas. And then obviously on the 1st of January, we have New Year. And those events, plus Hanukkah or Kwanzaa, if you're religiously inclined, those events are all part of the holiday season. If you live close to your family, you'll celebrate all of those events with your family. But if you live a long way, you might choose one of those events. There's a couple with different families in different locations. They will spend Thanksgiving with one set of in-laws and then Christmas with another set of in-laws. It is a family event. The one we had was fairly typical, I think, in terms of it was their family we were joining, but they had invited another couple over. Americans are very generous. If they hear that somebody hasn't got anywhere to go for Thanksgiving or Christmas, they will invite them to their Thanksgiving or Christmas. And indeed, that's what happened with us.
Question, Julian. Obviously, my understanding of Thanksgiving is it's a turkey dinner, yes?
Yes.
Does that still hold for Christmas, or is Christmas therefore seen as an opportunity not to eat turkey?
It mostly holds for Christmas. I did put this in the book, but I can't actually remember the data now. Americans eat a lot more turkey than British people. In Britain, you eat turkey at Christmas, and then a few families eat it maybe at Easter, and that's it. That's it'll be twice a year. Whereas Americans eat something like 10 times as much turkey. And it's not just because they've got bigger plates. They tend to sort of like eating it. Turkey is part of the plate. There are some similar foods to the UK Christmas dinner. Sprouts is very much part of the Thanksgiving menu, as is stuffing, cranberry sauce. But they have things which are different as well. So instead of roast potatoes, which you'd have in England, they have mashed potatoes. They have mac and cheese as one of their sides. Do you like mac and cheese, Michael?
What is mac and cheese, Julian? You do that knowing I don't know what it is. I know what cheese is, of course.
Macaroni and cheese. They call it mac and cheese.
No, not macaroni. No.
So mac and cheese is one of the sides. Green bean casserole, that's a big side that they have at Thanksgiving. Creamed spinach and creamed corn is another typical side. So turkey is at the centre, but they have slightly different accoutrements to their Thanksgiving meal.
And talking of turkey, of course, I have to mention the peculiar ritual we have where the president decides to spare the life of one turkey. And you see the two turkeys, and one looks very happy and one looks a little glum, doesn't it? But of course, what the other one doesn't know, maybe at Christmas, it's only a deferred stay of execution.
Yeah, it's a very odd thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a tradition. I don't know who started that tradition. Maybe I'll research it and put it in the next book. But it's a very odd thing, isn't it? I'm surprised with American politicians that they don't decide to spare them both. That's the kind of modern way with politicians. But
And of course, the other thing associated with Thanksgiving, in my eyes, is the American football season, because it's coming to its climax. And on Thanksgiving, they have a number of matches, don't they? Sort of now stretching over the period.
I've just researched this actually for the next book I'm writing. The thing about Thanksgiving is people think it started in 1621 or whatever it was. People think it's, that it's always been celebrated by Americans ever since. But it actually wasn't a public holiday until 1863, when in the middle of the Civil War, Lincoln declared it a public holiday. Because Lincoln declared it a public holiday, Thanksgiving as a holiday was resisted by the South. Because it was a public holiday, some college football teams decided to play American football matches on Thanksgiving because it was time when when they didn't have to work, so they could go to a game instead. And it was actually the nature of those college football matches which made the South convert to Thanksgiving. In the South, they love American football. They associated the Thanksgiving holiday with American college football. Now, of course, move on. There are 3 different types of football which are played on Thanksgiving, but the most famous is the professional form of the game, NFL. And they have 3 games, in the last 20 years, they've had 3 games which are played on Thanksgiving. So the Detroit Lions, they have played football since, I think, 1934 on Thanksgiving. They're famously one of the more hapless American football sides, but everyone gets to see them and they get the center of attention on Thanksgiving. And Dallas Cowboys, they play the evening game on Thanksgiving. And many Americans, particularly of the male variety, they will watch 12 hours of football on Thanksgiving. That's how they would choose to spend their day.
You mentioned holidays, but isn't the essence of Thanksgiving the actual dinner? And allegedly is this commemoration by the Pilgrim Fathers of thanking for a successful harvest so they would survive the winter.
The history is, because I've started to research, I haven't finished it yet, but I started to research it. The history, you're not wrong in what you've said, but that's kind of the potted version. Thanksgiving happens from the 16th century. The Puritans who went over there, the French and the Spanish, had a version of Thanksgiving, which I think they even called, in translated form, Thanksgiving, well before any Native Americans got involved. And then I think in Jamestown in 1619, which was the first permanent settlement in the US by colonialists, that was the first documented Thanksgiving. But the one which everyone talks about is the one in 1621 in Plymouth, where 90 Native Americans from the Wampanoag tribe joined the 53 pilgrims who had survived the first year in the place, and they celebrated the first harvest.
Okay.
There are some Americans who don't like Thanksgiving. They hear the origin story, which has been created, the 1621 origin story, and believe that Thanksgiving should really be a national day of mourning. They believe it celebrates a decimation of the Native Americans. I really see it as a family holiday, which is, giving thanks. And indeed, at the Thanksgiving we began the dinner, and before we ate anything, we had to go round the table and say what we were thankful for, which I think is a good thing. I enjoyed that experience on Thanksgiving.
The only parallel we have in the UK is the Harvest Festival, which is slightly earlier.
Well, Thanksgiving used to be a bit earlier, I believe. The dates of Thanksgiving have changed over time. Has been held as early as September, because it really was kind of more of a harvest festival. Whereas now it really is just a festival of thanks. What are you thankful for? You've had the year. Let's look at the positives. What are we thankful for in our lives? It's definitely one of my favourite holidays here.
Okay, so before we move on to education, you mentioned not once but twice your forthcoming book, Julian, that you're researching for. Do you want to give it a plug?
Well, I'll give it a plug when I've finished it.
But what's it going to be about?
Oh, it's going to be about America.
Okay. Well, that's nice and vague then, isn't it? America might give you plenty of scope to write
I'm still writing it. Give me a chance. I'm still finding material, having new experiences and researching them and writing them down. So we had a great time at Thanksgiving. So the focus is the meal. But after the meal, we were in a household which didn't watch the football, didn't watch television. Just like we would have done in a British Christmas, we sat down and we played a number of board games. Brought a few parlour games from the UK, and they had some US games, and a whole bunch of us just had fun playing family games, just as we would do at a UK Christmas.
Good. Well, I'm glad you had a good one. Now, Julian, your in-depth analysis of the education system with daughter 1 and daughter 2 has prompted a number of questions, indeed reflecting the global diversity of our listeners.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with Sharon from Australia,
Okay.
who asks you, what I'm interested to know in terms of the college experience in the US is how many students are of mature age. It's pretty common in Australia for university students to start their course outside their teenage years, and not just because of the gap year. Does this happen in the US too?
You shared these questions with me before the podcast, and I didn't know the answer to this one, so I had to go and do some research. And what I found, Sharon, is that 35% of US college students are mature students. Gap years are not common here at all. Daughter number 1 took a gap year before she went to college, but that was very unusual. I don't think there was a single one of her intakes or daughter number 2's friends who took a gap year. So those aren't common. Clearly, there are many students who do go to college later on in life. I suspect most of them do not go to the same type of universities that my daughters go to, which I think are mainly sort of younger students. I don't have the data for this. I suspect there are some colleges which are more tuned to their needs. So I imagine that mature students are more likely to go to their local university or universities with strong online programs. So Sharon, hopefully that answers your question. 35%. That's quite a high percentage, much higher than I was thinking.
Okay. So Dave from the UK asked whether I said I was concerned. So I think he means you was concerned about the amount of testing that children had in schools. And I'm assuming he's referring to the amount of testing in US schools compared to UK schools.
Dave, I would say when you go and live in a different country, you have to adapt to their culture. Really, it's very unlikely that you would move somewhere and you would say, oh no, that's not the way to do it. You've got to do it this way. But when we've moved around the world, we've always been very mindful of that and realized that it is us who has to adapt, not the country we're living in. And so for us, the fact that the US do a huge amount of testing in schools is not something that I personally would design, but it is just the nature of the US education system. We have just had to embrace it because that's the environment we're in. I can see there are some positives from having so much testing. It does mean that the kids get used to being put under pressure, and that may help in other aspects of their life later on. But I can also see that there are some downsides as well, with kids being too burnt out and too stressed. The fundamental answer, I think it swings and roundabouts. There are some pluses, there are some minuses. My kids are massively against having so much testing. I can see that there may be a purpose for it.
Okay, thank you, Julian. So the next question up is from Wendy, a Brit who now lives in Boston, and I think I know who Wendy is.
Oh, okay.
And I'm surprised she describes herself as a Brit because I know she's Scottish. So, but that's beside the point. She said that her sons lost their very English accents within weeks of starting school. But presumably, having heard your daughters on the podcast, she says, how come they've maintained an English accent?
So we researched this. So when we came over, our sort of family joke is that daughter number 2 developed the American accent on the plane over. Because really within a matter of days, she was speaking an American drawl. Whereas daughter number one, as you would have heard her, there's the occasional Americanism, but she largely has the same accent that my wife and I had. We researched why this was, and apparently the main reason is puberty. If you move somewhere before puberty, then you will adopt the accent of your host country. After puberty, you will tend to keep the accent that you were born into.
Now, I may have to challenge the science here, and I'm going to refer to the beloved. Now, the beloved is from Scotland, and doesn't speak too much with a Scottish accent unless she returns to Scotland. And then in Scotland, she becomes almost difficult to understand what she's saying, because within seconds, she adopts a Scottish accent. Absolutely. One of my favourite places. I'm going to say I think it's also a factor of who you spend your time with. I also had a friend who was English lived all her life in England, but spoke with the most fantastic Scottish accent because her parents were Scottish.
Right.
And that's what she heard around the house.
I think if you are surrounded mainly with one accent, you will continue with that. Now, when you go to school, you are spending most of your interactive time with your schoolmates, and they're speaking an American accent. You're going to pick that up pretty quickly. So daughter number one, although she speaks with an English accent, she can do quite a good American accent. And indeed, I will do an American accent if I want to be understood in a shop or something. I'll never ask for water because the person who's serving me will not understand what I'm saying. So instead, I'll always say, can I have some water? But as I understand it, the science is that those people who move before puberty tend to adopt the new accent, and those after tend to stay with their old accent.
Okay. Another question from Sarah in the UK.
Yeah.
What percentage of kids don't graduate? And what jobs does that stop them doing? And I was going to have a question of my own to say, I suppose my impression of the American system is if you're bright, you do very well. You know, it helps you excel. If you're less than bright, I'm more concerned around is that ability to maximise your potential. Right. It seems to be a system which focuses on the kids that do well. Is that fair?
Okay, so you're answering multiple questions there, so see if I can keep those all in my head. Your hypothesis is that in Britain, that is less so. Is that right? That non-bright children will be better catered for in Britain.
I think I'm going to say yes, because I'm thinking the difference between state schools and public schools. And I think in state schools, but dare I say it, the expectation is to maximise everyone's potential. Okay. Recognising that there's probably less bright kids, there's more average children in state school.
Okay. So answering your question first before coming on to the percentage of graduation second. So my perception is that education at what they call K-12 here, so you're sort of when you have to go to school, is very different according to the school district that you're in. If you live in a good school district, which is obviously where we chose to live when our children were at school, I think all of the education there at those schools is good, whether it's to very bright children or very average children. And I think you could go to another school district only a few miles away, and you might find that most of the education there was less good. So I don't think that America excels with the bright and does badly with the not so bright. I think that the education system here is very variable according to where you live. And that is down to a whole raft of complex issues like parental involvement, funding, a whole raft of things which will explain those differences. So, yeah, I wouldn't agree with your thesis. You know, when they do these lists of the best universities in the world, the US has a very large number of universities on that list. So I think that the most educated Americans are really very highly educated. That may agree more with your point. On the high school issue of graduations, I did a bit of quick research on that. 1.2 million children drop out of high school. Well, it's about 25% don't graduate on time. So that's, really very high. Mm-hmm. what jobs can't they do without a high school diploma? That's quite a lot. The way that the job specs work, I mean, you know a lot about job specs. Quite often, any job will say, well, what they call here GED or high school diploma required. And so if you don't have that, a very large number of jobs, including those at McDonald's and so forth, you will not qualify to do those jobs.
Gosh.
But is that different in Britain?
Just using the parallel, you certainly wouldn't need a minimum of, say, 5 GCSEs to work at McDonald's.
Yeah, you wouldn't. Okay. I used McDonald's as an example. I don't know what their specific employment practices are. But I have seen, when I've seen job specs, they quite often say high school diploma or GED. Now, of that 25% of who don't graduate on time, quite a large percentage of those will then go on and graduate later on in life. They'll go back to school, and there are a lot of government programs to get that graduation program. I don't know what percentage of Americans never graduate from high school or equivalent, but I imagine that there's always help for people who want to achieve that.
Let's move on to hazing.
Hazing and fraternities.
Yeah, she says, yeah. Sarah says it still happens. Are there any penalties if people are caught? Now, I was looking at my famous Wikipedia. It says something like 47% of all students experience hazing. And by hazing, I'm referring to things like initiation ceremonies. Is that correct?
In last week's episode, daughter number 1 talked about, some of the hazing which goes on in fraternities. The answer to Sarah's question is that, yes, fraternities often get punished for hazing or for allowing hazing. The typical punishments are that they close down the house for the year, or they are thrown out of the fraternity council. So they are banned. So they're very heavy penalties. It seems that most years there's some poor unfortunate student in a fraternity who dies because of usually excess alcohol use as a result of hazing. The universities don't like that, and they come down very hard on the fraternities. But usually they don't come down on the system, but rather than the individual house.
But so would it be fair to say most do have initiation ceremonies?
I believe so. I mean, obviously I have daughters who go to sororities and they don't really have hazing. They're much nicer. They have celebrations. With boys, they tend to want the boys to prove themselves. And they do a series of mostly menial tasks, like cleaning a toilet with a toothbrush, or, that's the type of task they have. Was there hazing in your day, Michael?
No, not really.
I went to a boarding school in Britain, and there was certainly a lot of, we didn't call it hazing, we had another name for it, but there was certainly a lot of that about. And it seems to be what happens when you put a bunch of men in charge of things.
Yeah. There was bullying, but that's sort of a wider debate, isn't it?
I
bullying.
think there's a fine line, I think, sometimes between hazing and bullying.
Yeah.
But certainly some of that goes on. Some fraternities, I think, have just got rid of it. And others, they will carry on with the tradition. Their father did it, they did it. So why shouldn't the next person through the
rank? It's a rite of passage.
A rite of passage.
Teachers' jobs.
Oh, yeah.
Is it still difficult to get permanent jobs? Is there a shortage of teachers?
So it's a complex answer, I think. So the pandemic has definitely made things... There are a lot of teacher openings because of the pandemic. Many teachers, as they are in Britain, are women. America has had an issue with getting women to return to the marketplace, with COVID, because, women obviously take usually a higher degree of involvement within their families. The moment you're seeing many school districts give really quite large pay increases to the teachers in their employment. That is because of market forces. Just like in Britain, a teaching job in one school might be completely different to the teaching job from another school. And so if you're in a good school district, then there'll be many teachers who want to work in that school district. And hence, it's more difficult to get one of those jobs. Whereas a poor school district, providing you've got some qualifications, you'll get a job in that school district. But that is not dissimilar, I think, to Britain.
No. Is it a job with status? With teachers held in high regard within the community?
I'm going to talk about the area that our children grew up in. I think their status is very high. Teachers in our old school district worked extremely hard. They may have had long summer holidays, but they were unbelievably professional and they were always available. They made it very clear to us that they were available from whenever they got in, which is usually about 7:45, 7:30 in the morning, till about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And they always were available. They were very easy to contact and they encouraged you to contact them. At every parade, you always had, each school had a teacher of the year, and the teacher of the year would be one of the main features of the parade in the community. Hey, we should celebrate Miss Lindsay because of the sterling work that she's done in our school environment in our community for the last 30 years. So I would say that they have high status. They are not paid brilliantly. They're paid better than in the UK. I think an average teacher with a good deal of experience and a master's degree would probably earn something in the region of $65,000 here, which I think is a little bit more than the UK. They have good status. Should they have more status? Probably.
My sense, Julian, and I'm not wishing to put you on the spot, that you hold the American education system in high regard. You recognise there are certain weaknesses, but when we've spoken previously, and I remember talking to you when you just moved out and you were looking at how the assessment system and how you got details of the assessment systems and the homework your daughters were doing, you hold it in high regard. Is that true to say?
I think the education system my children were in, I hold in very high regard. The education system more generally, I will be much more balanced in my viewpoint because I think that the differences are enormous. I love the way that the American education system recognizes that the parents are the most important. The children are the most important, but their parents are a very important part of that ecosystem. If a child misbehaves, ultimately, it's that child's responsibility and their parents who has to take responsibility for that. And I like that. I like that principle. And I like the principle in US law that it's up for the parents to decide how to bring their children up. It's not a state responsibility.
Okay. So, good series. Good questions, listeners.
Excellent
Thank you
questions.
so much. We obviously welcome more questions on the series. What are we doing next time, Julian?
So next time, Michael, so we're going to do 2 episodes over the Christmas period. One episode is going to have Columbus, Indiana.
And I feel that was a controversial choice.
That is, I think, going to be a controversial choice, and I'm looking forward to your mark on that one. We're going to discuss Christmas in America.
Which I'm very much looking forward to.
And we are also, you've added this one recently, we're going to talk about abortion in America.
It's currently, I suppose, the one issue that the States is high on people's agenda in the press and the media.
Right.
So I thought we should talk about it. But of course, it does sit as item number 2. Item number 1 was the fantastic speech given by Boris Johnson to the CBI in South Shields, commending the Peppa Pig world, including sound effects. Did you hear it, Julian?
I did. And it's you've probably met a lot of Americans over the last 4 years who immediately will apologize for former President Trump, and they'll feel very embarrassed about it. And I feel somewhat similar on the Peppa Pig speech. And the Americans that I meet, many of the Americans I meet are very informed, and they will say, "What did you make to that Peppa Pig speech?" And it must have happened to me 10 times over the last couple of weeks since that speech. They will say, "What was that about?"
And the answer to that question is, I have no idea what it was on. We have no idea what he was on. It was very a dangerous thing to start ad-libbing, Julian, as we both know.
Right. Well, although we do ad-lib for every podcast that we do. For our American listeners who perhaps missed the Peppa Pig speech, perhaps you'd like to describe it?
It was obviously Peppa Pig speech. That wasn't the starting point. The starting point was speaking to captains of industry and encouraging them to invest in all things Britain. But sadly, during the speech, he lost his way. He lost his speech, and it was very obvious.
As I understand it, the pages of the speech he was given didn't have page numbers on them.
Apparently
so
not.
He
and
didn't know which page to return to.
Yeah, and therefore, as we do, he felt the need to fill the gap. And it so happens the weekend before, he'd been with his esteemed wife and child to Peppa Pig Land.
Which one of his many children, Michael?
Well, that's a good question, because it's not a question he will answer in public, is it? So, but anyway, don't throw me under controversy. So for whatever reason, I think he was thinking around innovation, and he, again, told a complete wrong fact. He said it had been turned down by the BBC. The Peppa Pig producer said they never offered it to the BBC.
Okay.
But what I think he was trying to do was trying to encourage captains of industry to take risks and show innovation.
Okay.
But sadly...
Which I would encourage. I would encourage that general point, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, yes. But I think it was lost on most people.
Right.
It was lost on most people.
So if you haven't heard it, do go onto YouTube and put into the search engine Boris Johnson, Peppa Pig, and you will hear the speech in all its magnificence. It's a train wreck of a speech.
but funny.
And train wreck, I use train wreck in the bad sense, Michael.
Oh, wow. You're so harsh. You're so harsh. I didn't mention the fact when we went to Portland, Maine, there's a nice little train, Julian. I didn't mention that. I kept that away from you.
Excellent. Good. And then we're doing a second podcast, which is entitled A Christmas Present for Michael.
Oh, well, we look forward to that one.
Yeah. You're not involved in that one. No, it's a present to you.
Oh, okay. I can't identify things I would like.
No. It's a surprise. Like all good Christmas presents. We'll try and get them both out around Christmas, certainly by the New Year.
I think we should do, Julian, since one of the items is Christmas in America.
Oh, we'll definitely get that one out, yeah.
To Easter. As always, thank you everyone for listening. As you can see, we take to heart your questions, and any difficult questions where I can put Julian on the spot, send them in. And until next time, it's goodbye from me, and it's
goodbye from him.